Humiliation, not the petty kind, the soul-crushing, breath-stealing kind that lodges in your chest like a blade. The kind that turns your dignity into a spectacle for strangers to witness. That's exactly what Maya Caldwell felt as she stepped onto Flight 417, her heart steady with quiet pride. She wasn't one to demand attention, yet in just minutes, she would become the center of it all. She had no idea that this flight wouldn't just test her composure, it would define it. Because 7 minutes later, this remarkable woman would flip the script in a way no one saw coming. She wouldn't just reclaim her dignity, she would own the entire airline. This isn't just a story, it's an emotional roller coaster that will leave you breathless. Before we dive in, my friends, tell me, where are you watching from? If you love soul-stirring stories, hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Maya walked onto the plane with an effortless kind of grace, the kind that made people glance twice. She wasn't loud, she wasn't boastful, but she carried herself like a woman who knew her worth. Her navy blue blazer hugged her shoulders perfectly, sharp and polished. Beneath it, her maroon dress flowed in elegant waves, brushing just above her knees as she moved. She walked with purpose. One hand clutched a sleek leather laptop bag, the other, her boarding pass, a ticket to a peaceful flight. Or so she thought. At 5'6", she wasn't the tallest person in the cabin, but she commanded presence in a way that made people notice. Her hazel eyes swept across the first-class section, scanning the space with calm precision. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, blending with the faint hum of conversation. As she slid into her plush first-class seat, she flashed a warm smile at the older gentleman beside her. Richard Dawson, a well-dressed man with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard. He returned the smile with a polite nod, adjusting his reading glasses as he skimmed a Wall Street journal. Maya stowed her bag neatly in the overhead compartment, then settled in, crossing her legs with quiet elegance. She pulled out a notebook and pen, flipping to a fresh page. This flight was just a short leg of a longer journey, and she wanted to jot down her thoughts before landing. Unbothered by the curious glances of other passengers, she began to write, her mind razor-focused, her pen gliding smoothly across the page. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin. It was just another flight, until it wasn't. Then there was Victoria Langley, a seasoned flight attendant with a demeanor that could cut through steel. Her uniform was flawless, pressed to perfection, her blonde hair neatly pinned into a bun. She moved down the aisle with military precision, her clipboard tucked firmly under one arm. At 5'8", she had a posture that exuded authority, her gaze sharp, always scanning, always assessing. And right now, her eyes had landed on Maya. Something about the sight of her in first class made Victoria's expression harden. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her steps slowed. Then she stopped. Standing over Maya's seat, she tilted her head slightly, her expression polite, but tinged with something else. Something colder. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Her voice was clipped, professional. "May I see your boarding pass?" Maya looked up, momentarily caught off guard. But she didn't falter. She met Victoria's gaze, a soft but steady smile forming on her lips. "Of course." She retrieved her ticket with practiced ease and handed it over. Victoria took it with a little too much scrutiny, as if she were holding a document of national security. She examined the ticket, her eyes scanning it once, then twice. Then her expression shifted. A flicker of something unreadable flashed across her face before her brows knitted into a frown. "Is this first class?" The disbelief in her voice was palpable. Maya's grip on her pen tightened ever so slightly. She breathed in slowly, measured before replying, her voice unwavering. "Yes." One word. Rock solid. Victoria's frown deepened, her narrowed gaze sweeping over Maya as if searching for an answer that wasn't there. For a second, just a second, the cabin felt too quiet. Then, Victoria exhaled sharply through her nose, returning the ticket with a quick, tight nod. But her stiff shoulders betrayed her thoughts. She turned on her heel and walked away. But Maya knew this wasn't over. Victoria didn't go far. She stopped near the galley, where another flight attendant stood, a younger woman, brunette, barely into her 20s. Maya couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw the way Victoria whispered sharply, her eyes cutting back toward Maya's seat more than once. She wasn't imagining it. She felt it. Passengers shifted in their seats, some throwing subtle glances her way, sensing the undercurrent of tension that had just swept through first class. And then, Victoria returned. But this time, her authority was turned up to full volume. Her voice cut through the low murmur of conversation, slicing through the steady hum of the plane's engines. "Miss Caldwell?" Maya blinked, her heart skipping a beat, just for a second. She looked up, keeping her expression calm, controlled. Victoria's stare was colder than before. "Could you move aside? I need to verify something." Maya's fingers curled slightly around the smooth leather of her laptop bag, but her face remained unreadable. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, sensing a confrontation brewing at 30,000 feet. The whispers returned, growing louder. Maya inhaled slowly, then rose, not hurriedly, not hesitantly, with the deliberate, unshaken grace of a woman who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. With her chin held high, she followed Victoria toward the galley. As the narrow space closed around them, the tension wrapped tighter. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know. This moment would shake the entire airline. Maya Caldwell walked the narrow 100-foot aisle toward economy, her movements steady, unshaken. But inside, a fire burned. Behind her, Victoria Langley trailed like a shadow, her stiff posture screaming quiet triumph. But triumph over what? For what? Passengers watched, their eyes shifting between Maya and Victoria, whispers thick in the air like static electricity. Maya felt their stares, some curious, some indifferent, and a few pitiful. Yet she refused to shrink. Dignity was her shield. Her grip tightened around the handle of her leather laptop bag, her knuckles pale against the tan hide. This wasn't just luggage, it was a symbol of everything she'd built. Victoria stopped abruptly and pointed. "Here." Maya's gaze followed. A middle seat, 2 feet wide at best, cramped between two strangers. A deliberate choice, a silent message. Maya didn't argue, she didn't protest, she just moved. She slid in gracefully, as if she'd chosen this seat herself, as if this wasn't a demotion but an intentional shift in strategy. Victoria didn't wait for a reaction. She turned on her heel, vanishing toward the front of the plane, convinced she had won. But Maya knew better. She exhaled slowly, settling into the unforgiving seat, her shoulders brushing against the passengers on either side. Outside, through the tiny oval window, the clouds rushed past at 500 miles per hour, a mirror to the storm inside her. Disbelief. Frustration. But also, something sharper. Something fierce. With calm precision, she reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the smooth leather of her notebook before finding her phone. She tapped swiftly. Her lips curled into a faint, knowing smile as she hit send. A spark had been ignited. Up in first class, Victoria floated through the cabin, pouring coffee and flashing practiced smiles. On the surface, she was the image of poise, but her mind kept snagging on Maya. That woman's unshakable grace gnawed at her, like a splinter beneath her polished exterior. Victoria told herself she had done the right thing. Rees were rees. But then why was there a flicker of doubt? The kind that made her grip her tray just a little too tightly. Back in economy, Maya sat tall, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her face serene, but her mind was a battlefield. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see a young flight attendant, mid-20s, petite, with warm brown eyes and a kindness that felt like a gentle hug. Her name tag read, Lena Thompson. In her hands, a small plastic cup of water. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Lena asked, her voice gentle, almost hesitant. Maya's expression didn't falter. She met Lena's gaze, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she saw genuine concern. Her smile was soft, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "I'm fine. Thank you." She accepted the cup, her fingers barely touching the cool plastic. "Just a little mix-up, I suppose." Lena lingered, her brows drawing together slightly. She sensed the weight behind those words. But Maya's wall of quiet strength held firm. Lena gave a small nod. "Well, if you need anything, just let me know." She placed the cup gently on Maya's tray, then stepped away, but not before casting one last glance. Maya's calm had a weight to it. A stillness that wasn't submission, but strategy. As the flight stretched on, Victoria settled into her illusion of control. In her mind, the ordeal was over. Maya had been put in her place. She moved through first class with ease, handing out drinks, flashing tight smiles, pouring 8-ounce cups of soda with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She thought the storm had passed. But storms don't pass. They gather strength. And Maya Caldwell was the eye of this one. Maya leaned back, adjusting to the tight 30-inch pitch of her seat. The discomfort was real, but it didn't shake her. She gazed at the expanse of clouds outside, fingers drumming a slow, steady rhythm on the armrest. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't impatience. It was calculation. At 50 years old, Maya had learned that injustice should never be met with blind fury. Rage was messy. But precision was powerful. And in exactly 7 minutes, Victoria and the airline would feel the weight of her quiet power. A reckoning was coming, and it would be one to remember. The minutes ticked by, each second pulsed with purpose. Then, the intercom crackled to life. A voice, warm and measured, rolled through the cabin like a fireside chat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. We hope you're enjoying your journey at 30,000 feet. If you need anything, just let our crew know. Maya's eyes flicked toward the front. Her expression, unreadable. She reached for her notebook and scribbled one crisp line, 6 inches of ink sealing her fate. Then she snapped the notebook shut. The sound sharp, deliberate. Whatever she was planning, it was locked and loaded. The cabin settled into a soft hum. Passengers flicked through in-flight movies, buried their noses in books. But beneath that manufactured peace, Maya sat motionless, yet electrified. At 5'6", she radiated a quiet strength that Victoria would never understand. Up front, Victoria moved through her routine, blissfully unaware. To her, this was done. Maya's demotion was a victory, a box neatly checked. Oh, how wrong she was. Maya shifted forward, unlocking her phone. With a flick of her fingers, she typed a message as sharp as a dagger. "They'll call soon. Let me know when it's done." She hit send. The glow of the screen illuminated her face, her expression still calm. But now her eyes gleamed with steel. If Victoria had seen it, if she had truly looked, she would have known. Her smugness would have melted faster than ice in a July sun. In the galley, Victoria leaned toward a seasoned attendant, a man with 20 years of experience, salt and pepper hair, and a quiet wisdom that made him impossible to rattle. His name was Samuel Reed. Victoria lowered her voice, nodding toward economy. "Did you see that woman earlier?" Samuel arched a brow. "Which one?" Victoria stiffened. "The one I moved." His gaze darkened, and for the first time, Victoria felt uneasy. Samuel Reed arched a brow, his expression calm but watchful. "Which one?" Victoria Langley shifted uncomfortably, her arms crossing over her chest. "The one I moved." Her voice was defensive, tight, like a cornered animal baring its teeth. Samuel's frown deepened, the 10 feet of galley space suddenly feeling much smaller. "She had a first-class ticket," Victoria added quickly, as if justifying herself to the silence. But something about it felt off. Samuel leaned back against the counter, his salt and pepper beard catching the dim cabin light. "Off," he repeated slowly, his voice measured. Victoria hesitated. Her words faltered, tripping over themselves before they even left her lips. "Just a gut feeling," she finally admitted. "Better safe than sorry, right?" Samuel's gaze hardened. "A gut feeling doesn't justify moving someone." His voice was low, steady, but sharp as a knife. "Did she break any rules?" Victoria swallowed. "No, but—" Samuel cut her off with a look. "Then you better hope this doesn't come back to bite you. Because first-class passengers don't forget." He let that sink in for a moment before adding, "And neither does the airline." Before Victoria could respond, the in-flight phone rang, a 6-inch piece of black plastic, humming with fate. Samuel answered, his face neutral at first, then his brows knitted. Without a word, he extended the receiver to her. "It's for you. They asked for you by name." Victoria's stomach dropped, her heartbeat pounded, a heavy, echoing drumbeat against her ribs. She gripped the receiver, pressing it to her ear. "This is Victoria," she said, forcing her voice to stay level. The reply was cool. "Femme. This is the airline's executive office. We've received a complaint regarding a first-class passenger." A rush of cold washed through her. "Upon landing, you will need to submit a full report of your actions. For now, we expect professionalism. Treat all passengers with respect, and do not, under any circumstances, adjust seating without cause." Victoria's face drained of color. Outside the galley, the warm glow of the cabin suddenly felt too bright, too sharp. The 200-ton plane hummed steadily through the sky, but inside her world had started to shake. "Yes, of course," she stammered. "I'll handle it." She hung up, her hands were trembling. Samuel studied her, his gaze unreadable. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Victoria muttered, but her voice cracked. She was lying. Samuel knew it. She knew it. But she wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. Instinctively, her eyes flicked down the aisle, 100 feet away to where Maya sat. Maya Caldwell remained poised, her hands resting gently on the closed leather of her notebook. She seemed completely oblivious to the executive call that had rattled Victoria's world. But oh, if one looked closely, they would see it. A whisper of a smile, barely there, a glimmer in her hazel eyes. The tide was turning, slow, unstoppable. And Victoria was just beginning to feel the icy breath of the storm creeping up her spine. Victoria tried to shake it off. She forced a plastic smile onto her lips and moved through the 200-foot-long cabin, her posture stiff, her movements mechanical. She poured 8-ounce coffees, nodded politely, tried to act normal. But her mind, it kept drifting back. Back to Maya. Back to that unnerving, unshaken calm. It was maddening. How could someone be so composed after being humiliated? How could someone sit there, untouched by rage, untouched by defeat? Victoria hated it, because it meant only one thing. Maya was still in control. And that terrified her. Maya sat in economy like a queen on a humble throne, her maroon dress an unspoken banner of defiance. She glanced at her watch, 3 inches of silver, counting down the moment of reckoning. She crossed her legs and flipped through the in-flight magazine, casual as a Sunday morning. To the gray-haired passengers around her, she looked serene, unruffled. But beneath that exterior, her plan hummed like a perfectly tuned engine. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Lena Thompson. At 5'4", she was small but carried a warmth that felt immeasurable. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lena said softly. "Would you like a drink? Maybe a snack?" Maya looked up. Her smile was gentle, the kind that could break through a storm. "Just water, please." Lena returned a moment later, setting a 6-ounce cup and a napkin on Maya's tray. A small, thoughtful gesture. "If you need anything, don't hesitate," Lena added, her voice like a balm. Maya met her gaze, warmth spilling from her words. "Thank you, Lena. I appreciate it." Lena smiled, a real, crinkled-eyed grin. Then she stepped away, leaving Maya alone with her brewing storm. From first class, Victoria watched. Her gut twisted. The snap judgments she had made, the assumptions, were starting to crumble like rotting wood under pressure. But louder than her own doubt? The airline's warning, still ringing in her ears. "Tread carefully." The engines hummed at 500 miles per hour, but Victoria's chest felt tighter with every mile. She ducked back into the galley, where Samuel Reed, wise, patient, steady, was prepping drinks. He didn't look up. "Everything okay?" he asked, his glance sharp. Victoria hesitated. Then she forced a nod. "Yeah, fine." Samuel didn't buy it. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Look, I hope you didn't tangle with the wrong passenger." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "First class isn't a playground, Victoria. These people have pull." Her spine stiffened, but she said nothing. Instead, she busied herself with the tray of 8-ounce drinks, each one a meaningless distraction from the dread pooling inside. Because deep down, she knew. Samuel was right, and worse, she had miscalculated. She had misjudged Maya Caldwell, and now the ground beneath her polished shoes was starting to shake. Back in economy, Maya's phone buzzed softly against her lap. She glanced at the screen, her face unreadable, like a locked diary. She typed swiftly. "All set. They're monitoring." She hit send. Then she leaned back, sipping her water with the patience of a woman who knew exactly how this would end. Because she did. Maya Caldwell took a slow sip of water, deliberate, measured, like a painter adding the final stroke to a masterpiece. The cool liquid steadied her, but she hadn't needed the reassurance. At 50 years old, she carried the wisdom of experience and the fire of resolve. Her calm? It wasn't an accident. It was a fortress. A presence 6 feet away leaned in slightly, a whisper threading through the steady hum of the engines. "That flight attendant's been rough on you, hasn't she?" Maya turned, her face as smooth as glass. A silver-haired gentleman, distinguished in a charcoal blazer, met her gaze. There was no malice in his tone, just quiet observation. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said, soft but sure. He studied her for a second, as if weighing the depth beneath her words, then gave a small nod. He let it drop, settling back into his seat with his coffee. But the tension in the cabin didn't fade. It stretched across the 100 feet between Maya and Victoria Langley like an invisible thread. Passengers felt it. They didn't speak of it, but their eyes did. For the seniors watching, it was a lesson written in the air itself. Underestimate a woman like Maya Caldwell, and you will feel the reckoning. Victoria just didn't know it yet, but she would, soon. Maya turned her gaze back to the window, where the world stretched 30,000 feet below, a quilt of endless clouds, soft and unbothered. Her face remained serene, but inside, the wheels of justice were turning. And oh, how sweet it felt. Up in first class, Victoria wrestled with a growing dread. It clung to her like damp fog, thickening with every passing minute. Her once confident stride faltered, replaced by small, jittery movements. She checked seatbelts, poured 8-ounce coffees, nodded, smiled, repeated. But her mind was circling, spiraling, always back to Maya. She had been so sure before, so confident in her decision. But now, every time she peeked toward economy, Maya's presence seemed larger than life. She sat there, still as a summer dawn, her maroon dress a quiet banner of strength, unshaken, unbothered. And that pricked at Victoria's nerves like 1,000 tiny needles. She forced herself to look away. But even when she did, Maya's presence lingered. Maya flicked her eyes from the window back to her notebook. She turned the page, lifted her pen, and scratched a quick note. 3 inches of ink. To the casual observer, it meant nothing. But beneath the surface, purpose hummed beneath every stroke. A melody Victoria couldn't hear, but could feel in her bones. Whispers rippled through the cabin, soft as a breeze through autumn leaves. Passengers nudged one another. Eyes darted between Maya's poise and Victoria's unraveling. The tension simmered, a pot ready to boil. And though no one dared stir it, they were all watching. Victoria's breaking point came without warning. Samuel Reed strode into the galley, his 6-foot frame steady as an oak. In his hand, a folded note, his face, a blank slate. He held it out. "The captain wants you." His voice was low, unreadable. Victoria's stomach twisted. "What? Why?" she snapped, sharper than she intended. Samuel shrugged, a flicker of judgment in his eyes. "Didn't say? Just go." Victoria's heart thudded. A slow, sinking weight settled into her chest as she trudged toward the cockpit. She reached the door. It clicked shut behind her like a vault. Captain Elliot Morgan didn't look up right away. At 6 feet tall, his presence was a wall of quiet authority, his movements slow and deliberate. His co-pilot spared her a glance, then returned to the controls. Finally, Morgan turned. "Victoria." His tone was even, measured, like a metronome counting down a fall. "We've had another call from the executive office." Victoria's stomach dropped 10 floors. She opened her mouth. "Sir, I—" He raised a hand, silencing her. "This is serious." A pause. Then, "The passenger you moved, Maya Caldwell, she isn't just anyone." The breath rushed from Victoria's lungs. "She's tied to the airline's board." The world tilted. Her fingers went numb. "Maya Caldwell. The board. Oh, God." Morgan's voice sharpened like steel hardening in fire. "We've received direct orders. For the remainder of this flight, you will treat her with the highest respect. You will not adjust her seating again. And when we land, you will submit a full report." Victoria's throat turned to sand. She tried to form words, an excuse, a defense, anything. "I didn't know." Morgan's gaze didn't waver. "Did you think?" he asked, voice quiet but firm. "Or did you assume?" Silence. The worst kind. The kind that strips you bare. The kind that doesn't need an answer. Because they both knew the truth. Victoria had assumed. And now, she was about to pay for it. Morgan sighed, rubbing his temples, years of command etched into every line on his face. "Here's the plan." His voice was final. "You'll go back. You'll do your job. You'll keep things smooth, and when we land, you'll report to the ground team." A pause. "Until then, you leave Maya Caldwell alone." Silence stretched. Then, "Clear?" Victoria's cheeks burned. Her pride was caving in on itself. "Yes, sir." Morgan nodded toward the door. "Dismissed." She turned, stumbled out, mind a whirlwind. She re-entered the galley like a ghost. Samuel was still there, waiting. His raised brow met her silence. She grabbed a tray, hands still shaking, as she poured coffee for a first-class passenger. A few drops spilled onto the 12-inch tray. Damn it. She wiped them away fast, her grip as shaky as her pride. Back in economy, Maya remained untouched by the chaos, her every move a slow dance of control. As Victoria passed, Maya's gaze flicked up. Hazel eyes, piercing, calm as a lake at dawn. For just a moment their eyes locked. Victoria faltered, nearly dropped her tray. But Maya, she simply turned back to the window. Unbothered. For the seniors watching, it was a soul-stirring truth. Maya's quiet power was rewriting the story. And the fallout, it would stretch far beyond this plane. Victoria was only now feeling the storm's first gusts. Victoria Langley stumbled into the galley, her breath coming in uneven gasps. 10 feet of cold steel counters surrounded her, but not even their unyielding presence could steady the tremor in her hands. The captain's words clanged in her skull, relentless. She's connected to the board. The realization had hit like a 20-pound weight, crushing her pride, pressing into the very foundation of her confidence. How had she missed it? Victoria, who trusted her gut like gospel, who prided herself on reading people, now felt it turn traitor. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the counter's edge, her mind spiraling. A presence shifted beside her, Samuel Reed. At 5'10", he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen everything at 30,000 feet. He didn't need to look at her to know something was wrong. He simply continued arranging the snack cart, his hands methodical, his movements slow, the picture of patience. Finally, without glancing up, he spoke. "You gonna tell me what's up?" His voice was gentle, but probing. Victoria wavered. Then she sighed, a sound heavy as a storm cloud about to break. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The woman I moved," she swallowed hard. "She's tied to the board." Samuel froze. His usual calm gave way to something sharper. He turned, his eyes widening, from curiosity to shock. "The board?" His voice carried a weight that made Victoria's stomach twist. She nodded, her face as pale as the snow-capped mountains below them. "I had no clue. I don't even know what I thought." The words trailed off, a fading echo of every mistake she had made. Samuel's expression darkened, his arms crossed, the weight of his disapproval cutting deeper than any reprimand. "She didn't seem like what?" His tone was flat, but there was steel beneath it. Victoria turned away, fumbling with the inventory, her hands shaking over the neatly stacked 8-ounce cups. The plastic trembled, but it wasn't from the turbulence. Shame burned hot on her cheeks. Samuel shook his head, disappointment etched into every line of his face. "You can't judge people like that." Firm, unyielding, true. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her fingers into the stack of napkins as if the pressure could push away the mistake. But it was too late for that. She had made her judgment, and now she would pay the price for it. 100 feet away, in economy, Maya Caldwell checked her watch. 3 inches of silver, marking her moment. The flight was halfway through its 500-mile-per-hour journey, yet she radiated patience. She reached into her bag, retrieved her phone, and typed a message. Almost time. Then she tucked it away, leaning back into her 30-inch seat as if she were settling into a throne. Her calm was a fortress, unshaken, impenetrable. Across the aisle, the silver-haired man leaned in again, his voice a soft thread against the background hum. "You sure you're okay?" That flight attendant looked rattled. Maya's faint smile was a lifeline, steady and warm. "I appreciate it," she said, her voice even, unbreakable. "But everything is under control." The man nodded, skeptical but charmed by her quiet steel. He sensed it, the depth, the weight, the certainty. Maya Caldwell was not a woman who unraveled. She was a woman who moved chess pieces while others struggled to hold their ground. And right now, Victoria was losing the game. Up front, Victoria forced a brittle smile as she moved through first class, checking on passengers. Her tray wobbled with every step. Her mind, a tornado of regret. Maya's board ties had been a thunderclap, but her unshaken grace, that was lightning. Rare, powerful, terrifying. Victoria couldn't shake it, couldn't process how Maya never faltered, never raised her voice. That restraint, that composure, it was a force all its own, a tidal wave in waiting. She ducked into the galley for the next service, her hands still unsteady. And then, the intercom chimed. The captain's voice rolled through the 200-ton cabin, smooth as a river. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Thank you for flying with us. We're cruising smoothly and on track for an on-time landing. Enjoy the ride and let our crew know if you need anything." Routine words. But to Victoria, they jabbed like thorns, each syllable a reminder of her unraveling. She glanced toward economy, her heart pounding like a war drum. And then, Maya met her eyes, briefly, deliberately, and in that moment she smiled. It wasn't a smirk, it wasn't a victory lap. It was certainty, a promise written in her hazel gaze. Victoria's tray nearly slipped. Coffee sloshed over the 12-inch edge. She barely caught it, but her world had already tilted. For the seniors watching, it was a soul-shaking lesson. Maya's quiet power was rewriting the script, and Victoria's mistake, a ripple swelling into a tidal wave. The galley couldn't shield her now. Maya's calm wasn't just control, it was the eye of the storm. Victoria tried to move past it, to pretend it wasn't getting to her. But then, Maya did it again. She met her gaze, held it, and with the smallest of nods, barely perceptible, she sent a shiver racing down Victoria's spine. It wasn't smug, it wasn't a challenge, it was unshakable confidence, a quiet promise. Victoria's heart thudded as she fled to the galley, her 5'8" frame trembling. Whatever Maya was weaving, Victoria knew. She was outmatched, a rowboat in a hurricane. The engines hummed a steady rhythm, a backdrop to the electric tension crackling between them. Victoria clung to her duties, pouring 8-ounce waters, adjusting trays, forcing a blank expression, but her hands, they moved like a puppet's. Her mind, drowning in dread, she avoided Maya's direction, but that calm presence loomed, a shadow she couldn't escape. In economy, Maya remained regal. 5'6" of quiet might, her maroon dress a banner of strength. She checked her watch, 3 inches of silver, counting down. Then, she glanced at the seatback screen, a 6-inch map tracing their 500-mile-per-hour path. A faint smile flickered, gone in a heartbeat. She pulled out her notebook, her pen gliding with purpose. Every word, a brick in her plan's foundation. To the gray-haired folks nearby, it was just scribbling. But to Maya, it was destiny unfolding. Precise as a clock's gears. Victoria Langley braced herself against the cold steel counter, her breath coming shallow and uneven. She could feel it, the unraveling. Across from her, Samuel Reed stood like a sentinel, unmoving, unshaken, watching her with the wisdom of a man who had seen careers rise and crumble at 30,000 feet. "You've been a mess since that call," he said, his voice low, anchored in experience. "What's really going on?" Victoria's eyes flicked toward the curtain, just 6 feet away, separating the galley from the main cabin. A barrier. A flimsy, useless barrier between her and the consequences of what she had done. "I told you," she muttered. "The passenger I moved, she's got big connections." Samuel's brow arched. "Big enough for the captain to get involved?" He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "That's not just connections, Victoria. That's a red flag." He held her gaze for a beat. "What did you do?" "Nothing," she snapped, but her voice cracked, raw with guilt. Samuel waited. The kind of waiting that made people confess things they weren't ready to say. Victoria's throat tightened. She turned away, staring at her hands as they curled into white-knuckled fists against the counter. "Finally," she whispered, "she didn't belong in first class." Samuel went still. Then, slow and deliberate, he repeated her words. "She didn't belong." The air between them shifted, the weight of those 3 words pressing down hard. Samuel exhaled sharply, disappointment deep as a well. "You assumed." A pause, a sharp, unforgiving pause, "and now you're in deep." Victoria's jaw tightened, frustration boiling like a summer storm. "What was I supposed to do?" she demanded. Samuel's voice remained calm, too calm. "You tell me, Victoria." She swallowed. Her next words felt like broken glass in her mouth. She didn't seem like someone rich enough for first class. Silence. Not just silence. A silence that condemned. Samuel shook his head, disappointment carving new lines into his face. "You should have left her be." He turned back to the snack cart, stacking 12-inch trays with quiet precision. "Now you've kicked a hornet's nest bigger than you know." Victoria felt like she was drowning in open air. She barely registered the chime of the intercom. She flinched when the galley phone buzzed. She grabbed it with trembling fingers, her voice thin. "This is Victoria." The response was steady as stone. "It's the captain." Her stomach clenched. "The executive office has called again." A pause that dragged like a blade against her pride. "Miss Caldwell gets full priority service. Keep her comfortable, and apologize." Personally, the words hit like a hammer to the chest. Victoria's breath snagged, a fish caught on a line. Yes, sir," she choked out. The line went dead. She stood frozen, the weight of the order a 50-pound anchor dragging her down. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, and it crushed her pride to dust. 100 feet away, Maya Caldwell remained undisturbed. Her calm was a lighthouse in Victoria's storm. That tiny nod from before replayed in Victoria's mind, not gloating, not cruel, just knowing. A signal of the reckoning to come. Victoria's hands shook as she gripped her tray, the glass of sparkling water sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She had misjudged Maya, and now the board's shadow loomed over her. For the seniors watching, it was a heart-stirring truth. One wrong step can unravel everything. Victoria's unease wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a ripple swelling into a wave. The flight rolled on, but her world teetered. Every mile was a countdown to a storm she couldn't outrun. Maya's plan was locked in place, and Victoria was only now feeling its gusts. The captain's order hung around her neck like a noose. There was no way around it, only through. Victoria mustered every ounce of strength left in her 5'8" frame and steadied herself. This time, when she walked the 100-foot aisle, it felt like trudging through mud. Every step dragged. Her earlier choices were a lead cloak, pressing heavier with each footfall. This wasn't just a drink. This was an admission. She had crossed a line. And now, she couldn't uncross it. She stopped, right in front of Maya's seat. The tray quivered in her hands like a leaf caught in a storm. Maya looked up. Her face, a calm sea, unreadable yet heavy with quiet might. The air thickened, a silent clash at 500 miles per hour. Victoria forced a brittle smile, one that cracked at the edges. "Miss Caldwell," she began, her voice softer than a whisper. "On this flight, I wanted to personally apologize for any inconvenience earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part." Her words faltered, the smile flickering like a dying bulb. Maya tilted her head, her sharp hazel eyes locking onto Victoria's. "A misunderstanding?" she echoed, her voice low but steady. Unshakable. Victoria's grin wobbled. "Yes, She swallowed. "I didn't mean to disrupt you. Please accept this as my apology." She set the glass on Maya's tray with a shaky clink. Maya eyed the water, then lifted that piercing gaze back to Victoria. "Thank you." The words were soft, but they stung, because Maya wasn't accepting. She was studying her. Then, in a voice even and deliberate, a blade wrapped in silk, she said, "I think it'll take more than a drink to fix this." The words landed gently, but they hit like a slap. Victoria's palms dampened, her throat tightened. "Of course," she stammered. "If there's anything I can do to make this right, please tell me." Maya didn't rush to reply. She leaned back, her stillness humming with intent like a chess master mid-game. The silence stretched, a tightrope Victoria teetered on. Then, finally, Maya offered a faint smile. Not triumphant, but certain. "I appreciate your effort," she said. A pause. "But I believe the airline will handle this properly after we land." Victoria's stomach twisted into knots. The airline. That meant this wasn't over. Not by a mile. She swallowed. I understand," she murmured, her eyes dropping to the floor. Her cheeks blazing. And somewhere deep inside, a terrible truth sank in. She had just handed Maya Caldwell the reins, and Victoria wouldn't be getting them back. Victoria Langley turned and fled to the galley, but she wasn't running. No, she couldn't outrun this. She could only retreat. Her mind spun, caught in a relentless storm, replaying Maya Caldwell's words over and over. "I think it'll take more than a drink to fix this." A statement, simple and quiet, yet thunderous in its certainty. This wasn't the end. No, this was the beginning. Something bigger than her was brewing beyond her grasp. Maya Caldwell lifted the glass of sparkling water. She took a delicate sip, the bubbles bursting crisp against her tongue. Then she set it down with care. To the silver-haired passengers around her, she was serene as ever. But inside, victory simmered, steady and sure. The power had already shifted. Maya didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to make a scene. She had already won. Victoria reached the galley, slumping against the counter, her legs weak beneath her. The stainless steel felt cold against her palms, grounding her in the reality of her unraveling. Samuel Reed raised a brow. At 5'10", he stood steady, while she crumbled before him. "How'd it go?" His voice was flat. She shook her head, barely whispering. "She's not done." Her hands gripped the counter tighter, her knuckles bone white. "She's taking this all the way." Samuel sighed, his expression darkening like a storm cloud rolling in over an open field. "I told you," he muttered, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years in the air. "People like her don't mess around." He met her gaze. "You should have seen it coming." Victoria stared at the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane. The distance between her and Maya was only 6 feet, but it might as well have been an ocean. For the first time, the full weight of her mistake crashed into her like a rogue wave. At 50 years old, Maya Caldwell wasn't just a passenger. She was a titan, and Victoria had underestimated her. For the seniors watching, this was a lesson carved in steel. Misjudge someone's quiet strength, and the fallout echoes far. Victoria's trembling hands and racing heart were proof. Maya's calm wasn't just control, it was the eye of the hurricane. And when they landed, the airline would feel its roar. Victoria's mistake wasn't just a ripple, it was a tidal wave. And she was drowning in it. Victoria lingered in the galley, her mind a whirlwind at 30,000 feet. The events of the flight replayed in her head like a broken record. Never, in all her years with the airline, had she felt so diminished, so bare. Samuel moved around her, his 5'10" frame steady, casting her worried glances but saying nothing. He knew she was sinking into a sea she had stirred herself. Meanwhile, just 100 feet back in economy, Maya closed her notebook with a soft snap. 5 inches of leather sealing her triumph. She tucked it into her bag and straightened, poised as a queen. Her maroon dress was a silent banner. Something big was coming, and she was ready. Whispers hummed through the cabin, soft as a breeze through autumn oaks. But Maya's focus, sharp as a blade. Then, the intercom chimed. Captain Elliot Morgan's voice was steady as stone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and secure tray tables. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The cabin buzzed with movement. Passengers adjusted their 30-inch seats, stowed bags, and braced for arrival. 6 feet away, Lily Harper approached Maya's row. At 5'4", her warmth radiated like a comforting fire on a winter evening. Her smile was gentle but tinged with unease. "Anything I can get you before we land, Miss Caldwell?" Maya shook her head, her voice a gentle ripple across still waters. "Thank you, Lily. You've been very kind." Lily blushed, her cheeks pink as a dawn sky. "If you need anything, just say." Then she drifted away, reassured, yet sensing the storm beneath the surface. Up in first class, Victoria forced herself through pre-landing checks, her movements stiff and mechanical. A wind-up toy trying not to break. Her face was blank, but inside, anxiety raged like a tempest. Captain Morgan's orders thundered in her mind. Maya's quiet barbs replayed like a relentless drumbeat. Samuel's gaze and the unspoken judgment of another attendant tracked her every move. At 200 feet long, the plane dipped through the clouds. Victoria fought to keep herself together. Meanwhile, in economy, Maya gazed out the window, the city below sprawling like a promise. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest. 3 inches of calm, her poise unshaken. At 5'6", she had steered this flight's chaos with ease, bending every moment to her will. And now, the endgame beckoned. The plane touched down, a smooth kiss to the tarmac, a sigh rippled through the cabin. Seatbelts clicked free, bags rustled down from compartments, chatter rose like morning birds, but tension lingered. A tight thread stretching from Maya to Victoria. Victoria stood rigid near the exit, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. Maya's presence loomed behind her, a storm cloud waiting to break. The seatbelt sign blinked off, yet Maya did not rush. No, she waited, patient, like a river carving stone. She reached into her bag and typed a swift message. "We've landed. Be ready." Then she slipped her phone away, and finally, she rose, graceful, deliberate, her laptop bag a steady, 12-inch companion. She began her walk down the aisle, each step a quiet drumbeat of power. Victoria's breath caught. Her earlier arrogance was now ash in her mouth. She had underestimated Maya, and now the price was dawning, heavy as a winter coat. For the seniors watching, this was a lesson carved in steel. Underestimate the quiet ones, and you will feel the storm they command. Victoria's trembling hands and racing heart were proof. Maya's calm wasn't just presence, it was power. And when those airplane doors opened wide, Victoria's world would never be the same. Victoria Langley stood frozen, her 5'8" frame trembling, as the reality of her mistake settled like a 50-pound weight on her chest. Misjudging Maya Caldwell hadn't just been an error in judgment. It had been a catastrophic miscalculation. For the seniors watching, it was a soul-deep reminder. Judge too quickly, and the quiet ones like Maya at 50 will rewrite your story. Victoria's trembling hands and racing pulse were proof. Her galley refuge couldn't shield her now. Because Maya's calm wasn't just strength, it was a tidal wave cresting, ready to crash. And when her feet hit the ground, the airline would feel it. And Victoria's world would shift beneath her polished shoes. That last glance, that measured walk, they were the beginning, a reckoning rolling in like thunder over the plains. Maya held the reins. And all Victoria could do was brace. Maya glided toward the exit, her 5'6" frame steady as the crew around her exchanged quiet, knowing looks. The air at 500 miles per hour had settled, but a storm brewed beneath. Victoria straightened, forcing herself to meet Maya's gaze one last time. She tried to keep her voice even, tried to hold on to something. "Thank you for flying with us, Miss Caldwell." Her words cracked like thin ice. Maya paused. Her face was calm, but her hazel eyes, sharp as a blade. She tilted her head slightly, voice smooth, heavy. A promise that sent ice through Victoria's veins. "I'm sure we'll be in touch." Then, without another word, Maya stepped off the plane, leaving Victoria rooted in place, a statue of dread. Samuel edged closer, his 5'10" frame steady, his voice low. "You okay?" But they both knew she wasn't. Victoria stared at the open jet bridge, her stomach twisted into knots, waiting for the axe to fall. And it didn't take long. 2 security officers marched aboard, their 6-foot shadows swallowing the cabin's hum. They scanned the 200-ton space, then locked onto her. "Are you Victoria Langley?" one officer asked, his voice firm as steel. Her breath snagged, her hands clenched at her sides. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. The officer nodded. "We need you to come with us." "Why?" The word slipped out, hoarse, desperate. The answer was a hammer to her chest. "Questions about an incident on this flight." Victoria's face drained white. A ghost in uniform. Her choices crashed down on her like a 50-pound weight. Samuel watched in silence as they escorted her off the plane. Her stiff spine screamed panic. The crew's uneasy glances darted like fireflies, whispers humming in the background. Outside, Maya stood near the gate, her phone in hand, her calm a fortress at 50 years strong. She watched Victoria vanish with the officers. Her expression? A still lake. No ripple of doubt. That message she'd sent, "Be ready," had ignited the fuse. And now, the wheels spun fast. She turned toward baggage claim, her steps steady on the terminal's gleaming floor. No need to look back. No need to watch. The damage was already done. The bustling airport around her was a world in motion. Voices chattered, luggage clattered, passengers scattered. Some tossed her curious glances. Others whispered like bees, buzzing in a hive. But Maya? She moved untouched, deliberate. 2 steps ahead, always. In her maroon dress, she wasn't just walking. She was conquering. Meanwhile, Victoria's world shrunk to a stark 10 by 10 room. 1 table. 2 chairs. The air felt heavy. The walls too close. She sat wilted, her body curled inward as if trying to make herself smaller. The 2 officers loomed near the door, their presence unyielding, like sentinels. Her mind spun at 100 miles an hour. Hours ago, she had been a proud flight attendant. Now, she faced a reckoning. The speed of it all hit like a punch. Maya's response wasn't chance, it was a masterstroke. An officer broke the silence, his voice even but unyielding. "Miss Langley, we have reports of an incident with a first-class passenger." Victoria's throat was parched. She stammered, barely able to form words. I don't know what this is about. I was just doing my job." The officer's brow arched, skepticism cutting deep. "According to reports," he pressed, "you removed Miss Caldwell from first class." Then he leaned forward, 2 feet closer. His gaze pierced through her. "Do you know who she is?" Victoria's heart sank deeper, a stone in a well. She swallowed. I didn't. At first." Her voice was a threadbare whisper. The officer didn't move, didn't blink. His words landed like thunder. "Miss Caldwell isn't just an executive tied to the airline." A pause. "She's a major player." The truth hit her like a hurricane. She'd misjudged a titan. And now, the ground quaked beneath her polished shoes. For the seniors watching, this was a soul-shaking lesson. Underestimate someone like Maya Caldwell, and the fallout burns slow and fierce. Victoria's pale face and racing pulse were proof. Her 10-foot galley couldn't shield her from this. Maya's exit wasn't just a departure. It was a coronation. Her calm? The crown. The officer's questions loomed. A storm Victoria couldn't outrun. And while Maya strode free, her plan blooming like spring after a hard frost. Victoria's "thank you for flying with us" had been a plea. Maya's "we'll be in touch" had been a vow, sharp, final. heavy with the weight of what waited beyond that 20-foot terminal gate. The flight was over, but Victoria's descent had just begun. And Maya, she held the sky. Victoria Langley sat motionless, her fingertips pressing to the cold steel of the interrogation table. Her only anchor. Her breath came shallow, each inhale clawing against the silence. The two officers remained still, waiting, their expressions unreadable, but every tick of the clock tightened the grip around her chest. She wanted to defend herself, to explain, to find a way out. But the words felt like dust, crumbling before they could form, because deep down she knew there was no excuse that could bear the weight of her error. Meanwhile, just 200 feet away, Maya Caldwell stood by the baggage carousel, phone pressed to her ear, her calm and unshakable fortress. At 5'6", she wasn't just poised, she was in command. "Yes, security's questioning her," she said, voice steady. "Final, a judge's gavel hitting wood. Ensure the board sees all footage and statements." A pause, a nod. "I want this handled right, thoroughly." She listened, then spoke again, her tone sharp. "This can't happen again? Not to me, not to anyone." She ended the call, slipping her phone back into her sleek leather bag just as the first suitcases rumbled onto the belt. She reached out, grabbing her own, 20 pounds of triumph, effortless as her resolve. Passengers from the flight watched her, some with awe flickering in their eyes, others whispered. But Maya's focus stayed razor-sharp, locked on the horizon. The terminal buzzed, voices, carts clattering, announcements echoing 20 feet away. But Maya? She moved through it all at 500 miles per hour, calm, her maroon dress a quiet banner of purpose. She had turned humiliation into a clarion call for justice, and she wasn't done. Her strength at 50 was a force, setting a reckoning ablaze, one Victoria Langley and the airline would feel for years. Back in the stark, windowless room, Victoria's breaths grew shallow. The air felt thin, like there wasn't enough of it. The officers waited, but their silence wasn't patience. It was expectation. And every second stretched, coiling around her like a noose. Finally, she broke, a whisper, a plea. I didn't mean for this." Her eyes darted like a trapped bird. "I was following protocol. I thought she didn't belong in first class." One officer leaned in, his gaze sharp. "What exactly made you think that?" Victoria faltered. The truth sat like a bitter seed on her tongue, too raw to voice. I don't know," she stammered. "She just didn't act like the others up there." A slow, weighted silence fell between them. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. Then he turned back to her, voice measured and unforgiving. "Not acting like them isn't a reason to remove someone, especially with a valid ticket." He paused, letting it sink in. "Did she break any rules? Violate airline policy?" Victoria's palms grew slick with sweat. She swallowed hard. Then finally, a shake of the head. "No." The officer's voice hardened, a door slamming shut. "Then you had no cause." The words crashed over her like a wave, pulling her under. Victoria's heart plunged, a stone dropping into the deep. She had acted on a hunch, a judgment thin as a thread. And now, the unraveling crushed her. She longed to argue, to fight back, but the truth stood bare before her, and the cost was steep. Outside, Maya stepped onto the curb, the chaos of the terminal fading behind her. 50 feet away, a storm raged at Victoria's back. But Maya, she had already moved past it. The board, the footage, the witnesses. She had locked every piece into place. A chessmaster's endgame. For the seniors watching, it was a gut-deep lesson. Snap judgments can topple empires. Victoria's pale face and shaking hands were proof. At 30,000 feet, she had been so sure. Now, her 10-foot interrogation room was her cage, and the officer's questions a mirror to her folly. Maya hadn't just reclaimed her seat. She had claimed justice. Her calm, a torch lighting the way. Back at the baggage claim, the carousel spun. The terminal hummed. But Maya's stride, a quiet thunder. Each step, a vow that bias wouldn't stand. Victoria's protocol crumbled beneath Maya's truth. And the airline? It trembled in her wake. Maya stood curbside, the breeze cooler than before, a kiss of victory. While Victoria, she faced a reckoning she would never outrun. Maya owned more than shares. She owned the moment. A sleek black sedan purred up to the curb, its 20-foot gleam a quiet herald of her power. The driver, Nathan Brooks, stepped out, 6 feet of quiet courtesy. He opened the door, nodding. "Miss Caldwell, everything's arranged as you instructed." Maya's lips curved into a faint smile. "Thank you, Nathan." She slid into the back seat. with the grace of a queen. At 5'6" and 50 years strong, she wasn't just a passenger, she was a force. Inside, she pulled out her phone, the city blurred by at 30 miles per hour, but she wasn't watching. A notification pinged. Her hazel eyes locked onto the message, a formal review of training policies. Victoria Langley's actions under full scrutiny. A smile curled at the corner of her lips. Not vengeance. Justice. Back at the airport, Victoria's world frayed inside that 10 by 10 cell. The officers rose, their 6-foot shadows looming over her. One paused, voice cutting like steel. "This goes to the disciplinary committee, you'll hear soon." Then, the final blow. "You're suspended." Victoria's stomach plummeted. A 50-pound drop in an instant. The room emptied. She was left alone with echoes. At 5'8", she had never felt smaller. Maya Caldwell? A tidal wave she had misread, and now she was drowning in the wake. Victoria Langley slumped in the stark interrogation room, staring at the cold steel table in front of her. 12 inches of unyielding truth. The suspension. The investigation. Her own misjudgment pressing down on her like a 100-pound weight. She replayed the day over and over, every choice a thread pulling apart the fabric of her confidence. What had felt so right at takeoff now loomed as a ruinous error. Her phone buzzed. The sound was sharp, electric, like a wasp caught in a jar. She grabbed it, dread pooling in her stomach. A 6-inch guillotine lit up her screen. A curt message from HR. Disciplinary hearing, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Details to follow. Her hand trembled. The hearing wasn't a formality. It wasn't an opportunity to explain. It was the airline shielding itself. And she was the fall guy. Her breath hitched. She ached to shout, to claw back the authority she once wielded. But the truth was unyielding. No words could undo this. Maya Caldwell's car rolled to a smooth stop in front of a sleek, 50-foot tower in downtown Manhattan. Nathan Brooks stepped out, opening the door with practiced ease. "Miss Caldwell," he said with a nod. She stepped out, the maroon of her dress a quiet banner of triumph. Inside, her assistant, Sophia Bennett, greeted her with a warm smile. In her hands, a folder, 10 inches thick, brimming with documents. "It's all here," Sophia said, her voice steady and warm. Maya took it, flipping through pages of crew statements, flight logs, and training policies. She nodded, calm, unshaken. "Good, let's get to work." For the seniors watching, it was a soul-stirring saga. Underestimate a quiet force like Maya, and the fallout cuts deep. Victoria's trembling hands and hollow stare were proof. That stark, windowless room was her reckoning. Every minute spent in silence a mirror to her bias. But Maya? She didn't just win, she reshaped the game. Her phone at baggage claim, a scepter of power. Her sedan, a chariot of change. Victoria's so-called protocol had been nothing more than a house of cards, and Maya's truth had sent it crumbling. Victoria's hearing loomed, a countdown to judgment. She would face it alone. Her 5'8" pride battered, knowing the airline would brand her. Her mistake was etched in ink now. An example. A warning. Maya, meanwhile, stood at the top of her tower, her 5'6" frame steady as ever. Justice wasn't loud. It was unyielding. And the board's email wasn't just closure, it was a promise. A shield for others. Victoria's suspension was her cross to bear. Her misstep, a scar she would carry. She had seen Maya as less, and had paid in full. The sedans purr. The offices hum. They sang of Maya's victory, while Victoria's silence screamed her defeat. For us, the message was clear. Real power doesn't shout. It whispers. And Maya's whisper shook the skies, leaving Victoria grounded in its wake. Maya flipped through the folder. 10 inches of statements. 10 inches of proof. Her calm, a lighthouse amid the storm. "They know this can't be buried," she murmured, voice steady as a river. "They're guarding their name, but it's progress." Sophia hesitated, then ventured softly. "Do you think she'll push back, the flight attendant?" Maya paused, her sharp mind calculating, a ripple in her calm. "Maybe," she replied, closing the folder with a snap. "But this isn't about her anymore. It's about a system that let prejudice guide her hand. That's what I'm changing." Sophia's eyes shone with awe. "You've already moved mountains. The board is listening because of you." Maya's faint smile held quiet resolve. She had fought battles before, and she knew. This fight stretched far beyond today. Victoria rose from the holding room, her legs wobbling like a newborn fawn. Her 5'8" frame felt heavier now. She shuffled to the employee exit, dodging the glances of staff 20 feet away. The 200-foot trek to her car was a gauntlet of shame. Her uniform, once a badge of pride, now felt like a shackle. She sank into the driver's seat, her hands trembling on the wheel. Her mind a storm at 100 miles an hour. Years of grit, years of proving herself. Unraveled like threadbare cloth. Maya's image burned in her mind. Calm, poised, a titan she had misjudged. As she pulled away from the airport, regret gnawed at her, a relentless tide. Back in her office, Maya pored over the documents, her phone buzzing beside her. A lifeline at 30,000 feet. A message flashed across the screen. Jonathan Carrington, CEO. We need to meet. Maya's fingers flew over the keyboard. I'll make time tomorrow. Let's resolve this right. She leaned back. The weight of the day lifted, slightly. A door cracking open. This wasn't just survival. It was a chance to reshape an airline's soul. A battle worth her steel. Morning light spilled through her window, 15 feet of golden stripes across her desk. At 10 a.m., Sophia ushered in Carrington. A silver-haired executive, 6 feet of polished power. His suit crisp, his eyes tense. Miss Caldwell, he said, hand outstretched. Thank you for meeting me on short notice. Maya shook it, her grip firm, her calm, unyielding. I appreciate you taking this seriously, Mr. Carrington. Please sit. He settled across her 5-foot desk, adjusting his tie. His voice was measured, carefully controlled. First, my deepest apologies for what happened on your flight. It was unacceptable. We're committed to stopping this. Maya nodded, her hazel gaze a steady beam. I'm glad to hear it. But apologies don't mend the root. This isn't one flight attendant's mistake. It's an environment that emboldened her. Carrington's jaw tightened, but he dipped his head. You're right. And with that, the real change began. Maya Caldwell stood at baggage claim, her 20-pound suitcase a symbol, not just of the journey behind her, but of the battle she had fought and won. Her sedan, sleek and black, idled at the curb. Not a ride, a chariot of justice. Across town, Victoria Langley's drive home was a funeral march. Her career? A frayed thread. The airline headquarters hummed with purpose, 50 feet above the city's pulse. Inside, Maya's calm wasn't just strength, it was a tectonic shift. A shift that made Jonathan Carrington nervous. The board, once firm in their control, now danced to Maya's tune. Victoria's words, she didn't belong, echoed hollow, a misstep that shattered her world. Maya's reply to Sophia earlier that day wasn't bravado. It was a vow. Systems bend under persistent grace. The CEO's polished apologies weren't enough. She would ensure they stuck. Maya's 5'6" frame, a pillar for change. Victoria stared at the wheel of her car, lost in the weight of it all. While miles away, Maya stood at the window of her office, the skyline stretching before her like a victory waiting to unfold. Her fight wasn't done. Every word, every step, a brick in the wall against bias, a legacy we all cheer. Jonathan Carrington's promises sat like an IOU in Maya's hands. New training, tighter reporting, a spark at 50 she had fanned into flame. She turned back to him, her eyes piercing his 6-foot polish. It's a start, she said, her voice steady as stone at 30,000 feet. But it's not enough. I want timelines, updates, results you can measure. Jonathan hesitated, just a fraction of a second before nodding. A bead of sweat clung to his brow. Of course, we'll give you everything. Maya's faint smile was steel. Good. Let's make this a turning point, not a patch. Across town, Victoria Langley drowned in her own storm. A 15 by 15-foot conference room at Airline headquarters swallowed her whole. Her 5'8" frame sagged under the weight of suspension. Silence screamed louder than the hum of a 200-ton aircraft. 6 inches of stacked paper, complaints, reports, a full timeline, sat before her. Maya's truth was her undoing. The door swung open. 3 executives filed in, stern as oaks. A sharp-featured woman, 5'10" of authority, met Victoria's eyes with a cold, assessing stare. Miss Langley, we're here about Flight 325 and the allegations against you. Victoria's throat went dry. A whisper escaped. I understand. They unraveled the timeline in meticulous detail, their questions hitting like a windstorm at 100 miles per hour. She scrambled for defense, her voice cracking. I thought she was in the wrong seat. A weak excuse, flimsy as a paper wing in a hurricane. The woman's brow arched, sharp as a blade. Protocol? She glanced at the documents. Records show Miss Caldwell had a valid first-class ticket. When did you check before moving her? Victoria's palms dampened. Her breath hitched. I didn't. The silence was a 100-pound anchor. A bespectacled man seated 5 feet away leaned forward, his voice grave. "We have zero tolerance for discrimination. Your actions risked our name. Do you grasp how serious this is?" Victoria's head dipped. Her heart plunged like a stone in deep water. "I do." Barely a whisper. The panel pressed on, relentless as a winter wind. By the time she left the sterile conference room, she knew. The verdict was written. Her career was over. But worse than that, she finally understood the wound she had dealt another soul, and there was no way to take it back. Maya sat in her office, fingers curled around a cup of tea. 8 ounces of quiet triumph. An email from the board pinged, its tone firm yet yielding, a nod to her power. For us, the lesson was gut-wrenching. Maya's stand had rewritten the skies. Victoria's fall was a lesson carved deep. That 10-foot square room had stripped her bare. Her 6-inch stack of shame sat heavy in her hands. She had tried to use protocol as a shield, but bias had been unveiled, and Maya's 5'6" resolve bent an airline's spine. Jonathan Carrington's handshake trembled in her presence. Sophia's admiration mirrored our own. Change wasn't a gift. It was Maya's fight. Victoria's exit from headquarters was a dirge, her 20-mile drive home a requiem for her pride. While Maya's tea steamed with purpose, 50 feet above the fray, the board's words weren't hollow. They danced to Maya's tune now. Training. Accountability. Her legacy. Victoria's hearing wasn't justice. It was consequence. Her 5'8" frame humbled by a choice she couldn't unmake. Maya didn't gloat. She built. Every sip of tea, every email sent, a brick in the wall against bias. We cheer her. Because one woman's grace, one moment at baggage claim, had turned a flight's sting into a beacon. Victoria saw Maya too late. She was untouchable, a force she had unwittingly ignited. As Maya's office hummed, Victoria's world faded, but Maya's calm held the future. A turning point, a testament to quiet power's roar. The board's email glowed on Maya's screen, a 5-inch lifeline. At 5'6", she had reshaped the game. And tomorrow? She would ensure it never played out this way again. Victoria Langley sat in her 10 by 12-foot apartment, her termination notice a 6-inch guillotine on the table before her. For the first time in years, her world was silent. No early morning rush to the airport, no uniform neatly pressed, no sense of purpose. She replayed the hearing in her head, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, clawing for an excuse, a justification. But the truth stared back at her, merciless. Her own prejudice had torched everything. Years of pride as a rule enforcer? Now nothing but ashes. Her phone buzzed. Texts, some from friends offering pity, others, thinly veiled jabs. She ignored them all. Instead, she reached for the remote, one desperate escape into distraction. The screen flickered to life, and there, as if fate had one last slap waiting for her, a news report flashed across the screen. Bias in the workplace, how a single flight exposed a deeper issue. The footage showed Maya Caldwell, poised and calm, standing before a press backdrop, her voice steady as a heartbeat. Change matters. Accountability matters. Victoria's chest tightened, not in anger, not in defiance, but in undeniable, crushing truth. Maya wasn't gloating, she wasn't tearing her down. She had been a mirror all along, a reflection of Victoria's own blind spots. For the first time, Victoria saw her not as a foe, but as someone who had deserved better. Her breath hitched. The TV screen faded to black, but the weight in her chest only grew heavier. Could she fix this? She didn't know, but she knew she had to try. Victoria reached for her laptop, her hands trembling as she opened a blank email. She hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the 15-inch keyboard, the same hands that had once gripped a clipboard with so much certainty. Now, they felt lost. But then, with a deep breath, she began typing. To the airline board. Subject, apology to Miss Caldwell. Miss Caldwell, I owe you an apology. My actions were wrong, based on assumptions, not facts. I didn't see you as a valued passenger, a person worthy of respect. And in doing so, I shamed myself and the airline. I am truly sorry. The words poured out, raw and real, a first step from the abyss. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she sat back, exhaling shakily. For the first time since the plane landed, she felt something other than dread. Not relief, not redemption, but the possibility of change. A week later, Maya sat in her 50-foot office, tea steaming beside her as she skimmed through emails. The board had forwarded one with a simple subject line, apology from former staff. Maya's hazel eyes traced Victoria's words, her lips pressing into a thin line. It was more than just an apology, it was ownership. Victoria had written, "This forced me to see myself, my mistakes, my flaws. I want to do better." Maya paused, setting her tea down slowly. This wasn't about victory. Victoria's fall had never been the goal. Change was, for Victoria, for the next passenger, for the next woman who might be judged unfairly. Maya leaned back in her chair, exhaling. She was no fool. She knew apologies could be just words, an attempt at self-preservation. But this one, it rang true. She let her fingers hover over the keyboard, then typed her response. "Thank you. Accountability is the first step toward growth. Use this for good." She hit send and closed her laptop. Not out of closure, but because there was so much more to be done. Weeks passed, and Flight 325's impact only deepened. At 500 miles per hour, the airline launched new training initiatives, bias training, mandatory, publicly stated, a 200-ton banner of accountability. At 50, Maya's name was now etched in the movement, not as an adversary, but as a torchbearer. Her name whispered across the aviation world. Other airlines took notice. Some even reached out for her insight. She waved them off. Her focus wasn't fame, it was lasting change. One afternoon, she walked through the airport terminal, her maroon dress flowing like a quiet anthem, and something was different. The air felt lighter. Staff greeted passengers with care, not just efficiency. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. A dawn she had helped kindle. At the gate, an agent smiled brightly. "Miss Caldwell, welcome back. We've upgraded your seat. A small thank you for everything." Maya's smile was warm, but she gently shook her head. "That's kind of you," she said, "but I'm good where I am." She boarded, her steps steady, because she knew where she belonged. Maya Caldwell stepped onto the plane, her warm smile unwavering as a gate agent gestured toward a first-class upgrade. "Thank you for your support," they said, grateful, almost reverent. Maya shook her head softly but firmly. "Kind of you, but I'm good where I am." She took her 30-inch seat, settling in as the aircraft hummed around her. It wasn't about where she sat anymore. It was about what she had changed. The flight crew moved with heart, eyes on passengers, not just policies, compassion, not just checklists. Across the aisle, a young woman struggled to lift her bag into the overhead compartment. It was 6 feet up, just out of reach. Before she could strain further, a flight attendant stepped in, voice gentle as a lullaby, effortlessly helping. Maya recognized her immediately. Emma Hart, the same attendant who had treated her with kindness on that flight, the one that changed everything. Emma had been promoted. Now she stood at the front of the cabin, guiding others with the same care. Their eyes met. Maya nodded, subtle but full of pride. Emma beamed back, a quiet thread of respect woven between them. Proof that small actions ripple. That change, even at 500 miles per hour, could heal a culture. The plane roared skyward, but Maya's mind drifted, not just to this flight, but to the fight. Victoria's apology had not been mere words. It had been a seed, a crack where light could get in. Maya never needed Victoria broken. She needed her changed, a mirror of the system's shift. For all of us watching, it's a reminder. The quiet ones don't just endure. They transform. On the other side of the city, Victoria Langley sat in a 10 by 10-foot office. Her 5'8" frame was bent, but not broken. The termination notice was old news. What mattered now was what came after. She had turned her shame into a torch, and now she carried it into her work. Every day she lifted 100 pounds of responsibility, policy reviews, advocacy reports, training guides, each document a weight heavier than her pride, each reform a step toward undoing what she had once upheld. For the first time, she looked beyond her own 20-mile world. Determined to power something bigger than herself, the echo of Maya's hearing still burned in her mind. It had changed her, and this time the lesson stuck. She had lost everything, but she had found purpose, not redemption, something deeper, a rebirth, fragile, but fierce. Maya sat at 30,000 feet, flipping open her notebook. The old leather cover was worn, but the pages inside were blank. Waiting, ready. Her pen trembled with purpose. Victoria's email had been raw and true, and now her reforms had spread beyond a single airline. At 500 miles an hour, the movement grew. Messages flooded Maya's phone. Strangers, employees, advocates, 20 miles of support, lifting her spirit. It humbled her. This strength born of pain, her maroon dress a banner of quiet determination. She scrolled down to one line in her notes. Change begins with responsibility. It thrives with persistence. Maya closed her eyes, letting peace wash over her. The air outside her 6-inch window was endless, a 200-mile canvas of possibility. This flight, this battle, had been painful. But she knew, at 50 years old, that the sky was never her limit. It was her launching pad.